This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, as the conflict between Israel and Hamas ramps back up, a warning from U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris.
As Israel defends itself, it matters how. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
Also, as countries search for a transition away from fossil fuels, France's president urges the world to reconsider an old alternative.
Nuclear energy is back, and it is an indispensable solution to the fight against climate change.
And one of Canada's most loved athletes prepares to hang up her cleats.
It's a hat-trick for Christine Sinclair! An incredible story for Canada!
That's later, but first. Explosions ring out in Khan Yunis. Israeli forces heavily bombarded the city in southern Gaza today and ordered civilians in some areas to evacuate. Israel says it's targeting Hamas operations in the city. A day after a temporary truce expired, military activity in Gaza is back to pre-pause levels. As Chris Reyes tells us, some world leaders are calling for another break in fighting.
Israel says the strikes are for the Hamas targets in Khan Yunis. Several hundred were hit in the last 24 hours, sending a clear message that any kind of pause in fighting is no more. With the return of bombs, also more chaos and cries. A man standing in front of a damaged building says, "My brother is gone. My daughter is gone. Nothing is left." U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, speaking on the sidelines of COP28, echoed what the Biden administration has been saying in recent days.
As Israel defends itself, it matters how. The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
Israel says they have been designating safe zones in this new round of strikes, dropping leaflets and allowing aid to come into Gaza. Mark Regev is a senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
As we move in now to crush Hamas, we will in parallel continue to facilitate humanitarian support for the people of Gaza.
Hamas has also resumed firing rockets into Israel.
الموقف الرسمي والنهائي لحركة حماس.
A Hamas deputy chief telling Al Jazeera they want a permanent ceasefire before any more hostages can be released.
Moi, je me rendrai, vous l'avez dit, juste après.
Also speaking from Dubai, French President Emmanuel Macron, he says he's now heading to meet the Qatari emir to help negotiate a new truce that can lead to a ceasefire. In Gaza, it's apparent derailed discussions towards peace can't match the pace of destruction on the ground. From Israel's strongest ally, another public declaration that U.S. support now comes with conditions, including a stand against the displacement of Palestinians and any kind of Israeli occupation of Gaza. That message delivered by Vice President Harris.
We want to see a unified Gaza and West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. The two-state solution then remains the best path, we believe, toward a durable peace.
A goal that for now is still clouded in the thick fog of war. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
World leaders are meeting in Dubai as part of the global effort to tackle climate change. At the COP28 summit, the U.S. pledged $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund, dedicated to supporting climate action in developing countries. And 150 countries have signed on to a plan to reduce methane emissions. But when it comes to how to transition from fossil fuels, the proposed solutions vary. Our international climate correspondent Susan Ormiston has more.
This is as serious a threat as there is on the planet today, without diminishing one iota what is happening in Ukraine or what is happening in Gaza.
John Kerry, the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate in Dubai today, rallying the world around an overheating planet, promoting nuclear energy among the solutions to wean the world off oil, gas and coal. 22 countries, Canada, one of them, signed on to a recommendation supporting the growth of nuclear energy. France already relies heavily on nuclear. President Emmanuel Macron.
This commitment and the goal of tripling nuclear capacity by 2050 we are endorsing today sends an extremely powerful signal to the world. Nuclear energy is back, and it is an indispensable solution to the fight against climate change.
But critics say building out nuclear is expensive and slow, and dismiss a larger role for it in the energy mix of the future. A broader initiative gaining momentum is a commitment to triple renewable energy within 7 years. At least 118 countries, including Canada, have signed on to turbocharge renewables.
Of course, we need to scale up renewables massively, but it's only half the solution.
Tina Steege is climate envoy for the Marshall Islands in the Pacific.
Unless we also, at the same time, address that root cause, which is the burning of fossil fuels, the planet will continue to burn.
One of the big questions is whether to include in the final agreement a commitment to phase out fossil fuels, Canada's Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault.
I'm hopeful that we can agree on language to phase out unabated fossil fuels.
Even in 2050, he says, the world will be still using some oil.
We will need to capture and sequester those emissions.
World leaders continued to arrive in Dubai, including U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris.
Our action collectively, or worse, our inaction, will impact billions of people for decades to come.
Tight security and sheer numbers meant 2-hour-long lineups to get into the venue today. As organizers published the list of who's here or coming, all 82,000 people registered. By far the biggest climate conference. In 1995, the first COP in Berlin attracted fewer than 4,000. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Dubai.
As you just heard from Susan, COP28 has drawn record numbers of delegates as well as world leaders. But the choice of Dubai to host the conference has been a controversial one, given its dependence on fossil fuels. The CBC's Kyle Bax is covering COP28 in Dubai and told us more. So, Kyle, people who have been fighting climate change were surprised, to say the least, when Dubai was chosen as the venue. What's the atmosphere there now that the conference is underway?
Well, it sure doesn't seem like people are turned off by it. Just listen to the numbers. You know, the expected attendance was going to be about 70,000 people, which would make it the largest ever global climate summit. And the final tally could be even higher, potentially over 90,000 people. That's pretty extraordinary, almost as eye-popping as Dubai itself. And the venue, known as Expo City. Imagine a university campus, a sprawling network of dozens and dozens of buildings, each with unique, inspiring architecture, dazzling water features, and yes, plenty of gold everywhere. Stephanie, oil wealth can help build many beautiful things.
Well, the head of the UAE's oil company is the president of COP. He's also announced plans to almost double Dubai's oil production by 2027. How has he been able to convince the world that, despite all of that, he can effectively tackle the climate crisis?
You're right. Dubai is in the heart of OPEC territory. The oil cartel even has its own pavilion at the climate summit. That said, so far the mood is actually quite positive. Progress was made, an early breakthrough with the creation of a climate damage fund. Essentially, it's wealthy countries contributing money to developing nations to help cope with climate disasters. Many observers pretty blown away to see this type of deal on day one. It's not alleviating the concerns, but it has changed the mood here in an instant.
There are some people who say that having this meeting in one of the world's top oil producing countries is actually an inspired choice, kind of co-opting a place like Dubai into the fight against climate change as the way to actually make a difference. Is there any merit to that argument based on what you're seeing and hearing there?
There is that belief. I spoke with Carlos Pascual about this very issue. He's a former U.S. ambassador and now a geopolitical expert with S&P Global Commodity Insights.
It's an opportunity now to demonstrate that industry should be part of this process, to be able to demonstrate that it has to partner with governments in order to really not just reach the goals, but to be able to implement them going forward.
And there's also this argument, too, that this type of global climate summit could change the direction of the Middle East. There are some very wealthy countries here, and potentially this type of event could convince them to put more of that money into wind, solar, and clean energy. Pascual, the former ambassador, says it's already happening. They aren't turning their backs on oil, of course, but still moving quickly to invest in hydrogen, renewables, and other low carbon sources of energy. So there are these signs of what the future could hold.
Okay, thanks so much, Kyle.
My pleasure.
That was CBC's Kyle Bax in Dubai. Well, as the war in Ukraine drags on, President Vladimir Putin is looking to bolster Russia's presence on the front lines. Putin signed a decree this week to increase troop numbers by 15%. That would see at least 170,000 soldiers added to the Russian armed forces in stages, bringing the total number to more than 1.3 million. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's also looking to bring in younger troops. These announcements come just days after a series of attacks. Earlier this week, Ukraine's security service reportedly blew up multiple railways in Russia's far east, while Russia carried out its largest drone attack on Kyiv since the war began. To Venezuela now, where President Nicolas Maduro says he will call a referendum tomorrow on whether his country will pursue its claims over territory controlled by neighboring Guyana.
We are united nationally for the recovery of Essequibo, Guyana, to stop the abuse by ExxonMobil, to stop the abuse by the president of Guyana, who is a puppet of ExxonMobil.
Recent discoveries of oil reserves in Essequibo by ExxonMobil have intensified the long-standing dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. Watching it all from neighboring Colombia is freelance journalist Manuel Rueda. So, Manuel, how long has this border dispute been simmering?
So this dates back to the 19th century when Guyana was a British colony and Venezuela was a very young republic. And what happened was that in 1899, both countries went to an arbitration tribunal to decide the limits between their territories. And what that tribunal said was that most of the land to the west of the Essequibo River and to the east of the Orinoco River Delta would belong to the UK. And that's what we now call the Essequibo territory, which is what is under dispute. Venezuela initially accepted the ruling, but then in around 1940s, some evidence emerged that the ruling had been rigged, including the memoirs of one of the lawyers who participated in this arbitration process. So Venezuela retook its complaint and has been reclaiming this Essequibo region since then. And Guyana kind of inherited the territorial dispute when it became independent from the UK in 1966. Now, the International Court of Justice is looking at this dispute and has asked both countries to present their arguments next year.
What is this region like now?
So there's about 100,000 people living in the Essequibo region in an area that's 160,000 kilometers squared. That would be like joining New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So basically, it's a very sparsely populated region. There's only very few roads, and there's not any big cities, only small villages, one town maybe with 20,000 people. And but it's very rich in gold, and now there's also been oil found of its shores.
Okay. And why has it come up now? Why has Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, why is he calling this referendum now?
So Venezuela has presidential elections next year. The parties opposed to Maduro organized a pretty successful primary this year where they picked their opposition leader, a woman called Maria Corina Machado, and she's actually mounting quite a serious challenge to Maduro's rule. So what political analysts in Venezuela say is that the referendum has been organized not just to revive sort of a historical claim to a territory, but also to stir nationalist sentiment and boost Maduro's popularity before the election. And also one thing that they might be trying to do with this referendum is sort of to test their political machine, to practice how many people they can get to the polls, that kind of thing.
And is it expected to pass?
Yes, because basically in Venezuela, this is a very patriotic cause, and every child is taught in school that this Essequibo territory belongs to Venezuela. You know, in school, they put it on a map there with stripes, as in like this is an area under reclamation. But the interesting question here really is going to be how many people participate, how many of the 20 million eligible voters in Venezuela actually bother to turn up.
Okay. What about the people of Guyana? How is Guyana reacting to all of this?
So Guyana has pretty much described this as an existential threat. I mean, Guyana is a very small country with a population of just 800,000 people. And the Essequibo region, this place under dispute, makes up around 2/3 of Guyana's current territory. So basically, Guyana has been trying to turn to larger countries like the United States for support. They've also tried to get support from CARICOM, the Community of Caribbean Nations. And the stakes are very high for Guyana because oil was discovered off the shores of the Essequibo region around 10 years ago, with production starting in 2020. And this has really led to a revolution in Guyana's economy. The oil drilling helped to boost Guyana's GDP last year by 60%. It was the nation that had the highest growth of GDP in the whole world last year, thanks to the oil platforms that are offshore in the Essequibo region. There's the United States, which has an interest in this dispute because the oil that is being exploited off the Essequibo's coast is mostly managed by American companies.
Okay, thanks so much, Manuel.
Absolutely.
That's freelance reporter Manuel Rueda in Bogota, Colombia. Afghan migrants in Pakistan continue to lay low, fearing they'll be caught up in Pakistan's dragnet and deported back to Afghanistan. That fear is especially great for people who worked with Western militaries, like a former British Army interpreter named Ahmed, who says he's been trying to get to the UK for 2 years now.
More than 700 days I have been here in Islamabad to leave Islamabad and to go UK. I need a life, I need education, and I want to build my new home.
Within Afghanistan, the Taliban has been rounding up people who worked with Western forces. CBC News has learned a former Canadian Armed Forces interpreter has been arrested. His family is now in hiding, anxiously awaiting word about immigrating to Canada. Rafi Boudjikanian has his story.
2 years after Afghanistan fell to the Taliban's grip, the regime still hunts for those who worked with Western forces. Basir Azizi's father, Bashir Ahmad Azizi, is one of the latest they have snatched. He worked as a Canadian Armed Forces interpreter. I was exercising at the gym with my dad, Basir says, when the Taliban showed up and handcuffed him. Basir ducked into a nearby canteen until they were gone. The elder Azizi worked in Kandahar airfield with the Canadian military more than a decade ago. When Western countries left Kabul in 2021, he was approved for travel but was unable to board any flight. His family's been in hiding ever since. News of his detainment comes as neighboring Pakistan rounds up thousands of undocumented Afghans and deports them back to Afghanistan. And it's got those seeking temporary shelter in Islamabad even more nervous.
It can happen to each and everybody. Each one of us.
Muhammad Yunus Nasimi is a former contractor with the Canadian Armed Forces. He has been waiting for more than 2 years to find out if he'll be able to immigrate to Canada, and knows he has a target on his back should he be deported, just like Azizi.
We are facing the same threat right here because any day police catch us in Pakistan and they will deport us, and we have to face those consequences back there in Afghanistan.
All of them are in danger.
Nipa Banerjee is a former Canadian diplomat who worked in Kabul. She lectures about international development at the University of Ottawa. Banerjee says one way Canada could help people like Azizi is by talking to the Taliban through diplomatic channels, offering financial assistance in exchange for human rights guarantees.
The removal of the sanctions is one thing that could be done, and then also provide some programming options for women's rights.
Ottawa does have a special representative in Qatar who engages with the Taliban, and he's previously asked for safe passage for former Canadian government employees. Immigration Canada says it sympathizes with the plight of Afghans in danger but cannot comment on individual cases. It says some 6 charter flights carrying Afghan migrants have left Islamabad since the start of November. Back in Afghanistan, that's little comfort for Azizi's son. It's been more than a week since the Taliban took his dad, and he's heard nothing from his father since. I have a younger brother who is 10 years old, he says. We've told him our dad is just on an errand. We have not said what happened to him. Rafi Boudjikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
Ontario's Liberal Party has a new leader, Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie. She'll take over the role from interim leader John Fraser. Crombie was elected with 53% of the vote after 3 rounds. The Liberals currently hold just 9 out of 124 seats in the Ontario legislature, which isn't enough seats to hold official party status. Now, she's led Canada's women's soccer team to Olympic gold, been named Canada Soccer's Player of the Year 14 times, and scored more goals overall than any other soccer player in the world, male or female. But Christine Sinclair is calling time on her soccer career. She has 1 more game left for the national team. Philip Lee Shannock reports on her legendary career.
Christine Sinclair, she scores for Canada!
Over and over again for 23 seasons, Christine Sinclair has done it.
It's a hat-trick for Christine Sinclair!
190 times.
Sinclair has done it! The Queen of the North!
Mariam Karabi, the host of the soccer podcast She Scores Bangers, says Sinclair's legacy can't be overstated.
You're talking over 300 international appearances. Like, that's a number that not many athletes can reach. 190 goals.
Captain Fantastic!
On the eve of her retirement, Canadian sports stars sent their well wishes.
Hi, Christine. It's Leila Fernandez, and I just want to congratulate you on an amazing career. Not only inspired us women, but you have inspired me.
Sinclair didn't just get kudos, but also a tongue-in-cheek offer to play in Wales from a Wrexham AFC team owner and fellow Vancouverite.
Hi, Christine. It's Ryan Reynolds. I just want to wish you all the best in retirement. Well, it's not really retirement. Moving on in your career to Wrexham. It's huge for the town, for the club.
Sinclair says when she made her soccer debut for the Canadian national team at age 16, there were few role models.
Dream of representing Canada that, I didn't have that when I was little. So to see the times changing and know that this is just the beginning.
Fittingly, the 40-year-old Sinclair's career will end where it started, in British Columbia, playing against rivals Australia on Tuesday. But she says she won't be far from the pitch.
I can't wait to just become a fan and watch the game and be in awe of the talent that's out there. I'm not just quitting cold turkey, I'll still be around.
But one final hurrah is planned. December 12th will be Christine Sinclair Day in BC, the jersey number of an enduring soccer legend. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
And CBC Sports has a full interview with Christine Sinclair that's online now at cbc.ca/sports. On Monday morning, you'll also find tributes to Sinclair posted online. You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Musicians hoping to reach a global audience may no longer have to contend with other languages. A Canadian producer and his company are using artificial intelligence to mimic a singer's vocals in multiple languages. Jenna Benchetrit tells us how it works.
So if he goes into a falsetto type of voice in one area, then we need to match that just in Korean.
How do you turn an English language artist's song into a K-pop hit without them ever learning Korean?
It's not just throw it into a translator, website, and whatever it spits out, that's your song. You have to be artistic about it.
Canadian producer Jordan Young uses artificial intelligence to help American pop singer Lauv thank his Korean fans in their language. They tapped K-pop singer Kevin Woo to rewrite and record the song in Korean, a demo that was then combined with an AI clone of Lauv's voice.
It was about aligning artist rights with AI, and at minimum, we should give artists control over how their voice is used.
Other musicians are doing it too. Korean artist Midnat recorded his song Masquerade in 6 languages, thanks to his record label's in-house artificial intelligence.
Even before AI really came to the forefront this year, artists have already been trying to target fans in different languages.
Kristen Robinson is a music publishing reporter at Billboard.
Having Justin Bieber hop onto, a Latin track is not something I would have ever anticipated.
But she says using AI to reach those fans might be taken the wrong way.
It's very possible that people find it disingenuous.
Toronto singer-songwriter Jacqueline Tay agrees. Tay wants to incorporate other languages into her music. Using AI to create those songs sounds exciting, but potentially limiting.
You lose out on what could have been a really beautiful relationship between you and that language. When we throw AI into the mix, we kind of sever that relationship and bypass it altogether.
During a year that saw an explosion of AI-generated songs made to sound like popular artists, the producer Young says the genie is out of the bottle and that it's time to adapt.
I'm never going to build something that removes the human being from the creative process. And there are lots of companies that are attempting to do that right now.
He's already working on a new project of this variety. Potentially, he says, for a Canadian artist. Jenna Benchitrit, CBC News, Toronto.
As Jenna told us, AI is making it easier than ever for singers to reach fans in other languages. But back in the pre-AI days, that wasn't possible. If an artist wanted to sing in another language, they just had to learn it. And if they wanted to sing in 8 languages, they had to learn them all. Just ask Avril Lavigne, who managed exactly this feat for her 2007 song, Girlfriend. Some people said her pronunciations weren't very precise and some of the phrasing didn't quite fit, like in Portuguese or Mandarin. But the language lessons stuck, and Avril says she still knows them all, belting them out on the Late Late Show's Carpool Karaoke just a few months ago.
Hey, hey, ashate, that was Japanese.
Clearly, it's this kind of commitment that has cemented Lavigne as a Canadian icon. And tonight, she's being recognized as such. She's one of this year's inductees into Canada's Walk of Fame, a cohort that also includes Rick Mercer, hockey player Connor McDavid, the show Degrassi, and musicians like April Wine, Glass Tiger, with a special honor going to Cardinal Offishall. He's receiving the Alan Slate Music Impact Honor, which celebrates a Canadian artist who has inspired and driven positive impact in the music industry. So we'll leave you with some more of his song, Dangerous, here on The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that's her, the big dog trying to get a little the perk. X-Man looking at me like I'm Lucifer, cause he knows I would deal with the case, yes sir. If I was the last man on earth, I would only take that girl and the search. She give out no definition to the word curve. Got chicks in the strip club and being hers. Bodies like weapons of mass eruptions.